So I'm going to record, and it says we're recording. So this is Gardner-Webb MELS 601 add-on. This is September 10th, 2019. I'm Dr. Robin Hamilton, and I'm your instructor. This is week 3 already, and I'm glad you're here, and thank you for being here, everybody, and hello to everyone that we didn't already personally greet. So almost everyone submitted on Sunday night. So some of you emailed and said, well, I don't see anything from this person. Well, that's because nothing was submitted yet. So so that's what you're still waiting on to look for that. So everyone's work was really like good and a solid foundation. You all seem to really have a good concept and a good grasp of what you were supposed to do. APA is probably the trickiest part to it all. But let me go ahead and address, yes, I know. Let me go ahead and address, I'll tell y'all sometime my story about my doctoral dissertation and how I spent 2 days in Greenville without even a change of clothes trying to change the word THEIR to THE. It can be very, very tricky. So let's talk about the feedback for just a minute. So there's 2 different ways. Like if I put your feedback in that thread, then everybody can see that feedback. And that can be okay because that can be helpful for everybody because everybody has common things that we're all going through right now. And then there's another little box where I can put instructor feedback for you only. So then after I kept on putting feedback where everybody could see it, I started reflecting and thinking maybe I should just be putting it in the instructor part. So that's why I just started putting it in the instructor part. And so then that's why some of you saw it in some other areas but didn't see it like you had seen other people's. So that's why that was. So Crystal, Crystal, did you figure out how you can go in and print that part out, the instructor feedback? You're still muted.
No, I haven't figured out how to print that yet, but I was looking around right before class, so I know I can screenshot it and then print my screenshots. And it's really skinny on the side of the page. So like trying to make sure I was getting everything. I just wanted a big piece of paper.
And another thing I noticed about using that feedback box, besides that it's more private, is that every comment I make seems to stay. So starting today, I started putting 9, 10, 19s at the top so that I would know, oh, that's when I said that or whatever. So just so you know that that's there and that's sort of the way that is. So if that answers, and maybe that even answers your questions, Crystal, but so that's why that's a little different. Even though I do think there's some value in, because there are common things that everyone is doing, and that's just the way it always is. So I do think there's value sometimes of everybody seeing those same common things because number one, you can just sort of see it, and before you maybe turn yours in, you can see that feedback. But number two, you know you're not in this boat by yourself. We're all doing the same things. So I heard from Dr. Stedman that he's had some great Coach One visits with some of you. He's really enjoyed his time with you all. So let's talk just a little about APA, use of first acronyms. So if you're going to say DIBBLS, I'll just use that. You would say dynamic indicators of early basic literacy skills, and then in parentheses you would put DIBBLS. And then from there on out, you could use the term just DIBBLS. So that's one thing. Your references and citations, and sometimes maybe it's just a typo. Maybe it says DeFore 2014 in your references, but in your citation you have DeFore 04. So it could just be a typo, you know, I don't know. But just going back and rechecking those things to make sure that they're matching, and that anything you have referenced in your narrative that you do have a reference for in your reference section. There are different APA rules for short quotations and long quotations. Like a short quotation of 10 words can just be in a quote in the sentence. But a quotation of 40 words or more, and that counts ands and tos and articles like that, has to have a special formatting. It's sort of like in a little indented paragraph form, and you can look that up and get the exact margin settings and all that for that. References do have APA formatting rules. The way that they go in, they're not numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 or anything like that. And then they also have that wise owl that is in your APA materials. You can go in there and you can basically just put anything in the search bar and it'll pull it up for you. Appendices come last. So it's your reference section, then your appendices. And right now you're just putting it at the end of each of your tasks. But before you submit your final total APSL, you'll combine all those into one. But appendices come last. So it's your work, then it's your reference section, and then it's your appendices. And appendices, if you can get like, they're labeled like A, the first one is A, and that would be the first one that's listed in your APSL task 1 would be A. And you would say see Appendix A, or just Appendix A. And then B comes next. And if you can get those on separate pages and do like a page break in between, that's good as well. We don't want to use words such as we, I, our. So instead of our school, you would say the school. Instead of I, the candidate, instead of referring to your PLC team as we did, whatever, you would say the candidate and the team, whatever you did. There are also APA guidelines for bulleted items and the way that should look, and period and 2 spaces. So when you put a period at the end of the sentence, you say space, space, and then you start your next sentence. And then any charts, graphs, tables, or anything like that that you put in there, you're going to label those as figures. And there are guidelines for figures. The caption goes in 10-point font for your figures. And then the same thing is that your figures would be labeled, like the first one that comes in your paper would be figure 1, then figure 2, and all that. So with the template that was provided for you, just maintain the integrity of that. Don't change the font or the size or anything like that. The only thing you're really going to change in that is that once you go in and like do your description where the yellow is, you'll take that yellow highlighting off of your heading. Or the red directions, you'll take those red directions out once you do that. So just let me share my screen one more time and let me show you, and just as a reminder, and I know there is just so much, whoops, over here. Now I can't seem to get that out of the way. There we go. In Blackboard, we do have these APA format materials. So there's your link to your Purdue OWL Writing Center. We'll talk about annotated bibliographies next week. And then here are some APA pointers, just a little sheet to help remind you of some pointers that you can use right there. So that's just some things that I saw that perhaps might help. But I think there's a chat question. If I put something in the appendix, do I have to reference it in my paper? It should be referenced in your paper. Yes, 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 yes. It should be referenced, just like Appendix A. You would just put at the end of the sentence, like, principal provided permission for PLC, and then at the end of that sentence, you would put Appendix A, period. And then when you scroll down, we would see that in Appendix A. That's correct. So are there any other questions anybody has about that before we go ahead and talk a little about Task 1 and just make sure that we need to do another cover sheet and include the same references? I don't understand, Laura. Will you unmute yourself?
So when we turn in Task 2, I'm sorry, I didn't even put that on there. I thought I wrote it.
No, it's okay.
Do we have to do another cover sheet and include the same appendixes and references, or do we need to just turn it in as if it's going to be a continuation of what we've already done in between our current appendix references and Task 1?
So when you go into your, oh, no, don't do anything with that. What is going on with my, no, don't mess that up. Oh, Lord, let's see. So when you're in your, right here, I've got to get our faces out of the way over here. I can't seem to maneuver this. And one of these days I'll learn how to get those pop-ups from not popping up anymore. But that's for another day. So your name, so then you did task 1, you did prompt 1, you did your research, your selection process, and your meeting. And then after that, you have your references and you have your appendices. So you're going to leave that there, and then you're going to start with task 2. And then you will do your yellow parts for your narratives for task 2, and then you're going to again put your references and your appendices right there. So that way you're just sort of keeping all your tasks separate and to themselves until the very end, when you take your whole reference section and put it at the end of the APSL product, well, the next to the last, because the last thing will be the appendices. Because what might happen is throughout your 5 tasks in the APSL is you'll probably use the same DeFore research multiple times. So then what will happen is you'll have him in there once at the very end. You may even reference your appendices more than once throughout your product. So then again, you would just put Appendix A, Appendix whatever order it initially came in. So hopefully that helps with that. So I'm going to minimize that back down. And so, so task 1, most of you turned in your task 1 on Sunday night, and thank you all for that. And again, you all have done such a good job with that. So you're getting feedback from me, and you're getting feedback from your peers. So once you've gotten feedback from me, feedback from your peers, and you've gone back and you have revamped it, turn it back in to the very same place where you turned it in at first, which is task for review, task 1. So you'll turn it back in there, and then I will reread and I will change your grade at that point. And then remember that when you're doing your peer reviews on those templates, you have to upload those in 2 places. You have to upload those right here in APSL task for review, task 1 for peer and instructor review, so that your peer can see the feedback that you gave them. And then for your grade, you will submit those to the APSL completed peer review Dropbox right here. So if I were to have been Laura's peer and I did a peer review template on Laura, then I will put that in 2 places, task for review and completed peer review Dropbox. And so you all have done it's very hard to give adults feedback, and you all have done a good job with that feedback. And so I'm sort of going to ease you into that feedback because I know how hard it can be. But some of you have been very descriptive and very specific with feedback. So when you say, you demonstrated this, you're giving examples of how you demonstrated that, and that is exemplary. That is really, really good work. And so continue to just think in your mind, descriptive and specific, descriptive and specific. Because if you're just copying words sometimes from the template prompt, then sometimes that really doesn't have meaning to the person who's reading it. And the more descriptive and specific you are with your peers, the more that helps them be able to reflect and then go back and change their work. And if there's one thing I've ever learned is that everything is iterative, and that's a word that I didn't know, but a few years ago is when I learned that word. And that means that even when you think you have something absolutely perfect, you can go back and look at it the next time and think, oh man, I should have, wish I would have, or why didn't I see that misspelled word the first 500 times I looked at this? And so that's just the way it is. And so, so part of this process is just giving you experience with that. And then today at school, and the reason for the peer feedback is because as an administrator, you're going to be giving adults feedback, and that is not always an easy thing to do. You can always do it respectfully, and I just always try to never let my behavior be the problem. But you're going to have to give them feedback, and sometimes it's very personal feedback that it is hard to give. And so today my PTA had submitted some things that they wanted to send out to everybody, and I had to give and as I was giving them feedback on the things they had left out of the flyers or whatever it was they were wanting to send home with everyone, like they didn't have the times on there or whatever. And I was sitting there typing the email back about my suggestions for them to consider. I thought, this is another part of what this is training you all to do, because not only to your teachers are you going to have to give feedback, but you're going to have to give feedback to your PTA who is volunteering their time for you. You're going to have to give feedback to parents sometimes. So all these things are things that are really going to help you hone your skills in providing adult feedback. So that is part of that. So your task 1, so you'll turn that in for an initial review from the instructor and 2 peers, and then turn it back in once you have revised that for another, right back to the same place, task 1, for another look with a change in grade of that for that last time. And then remember that when you're uploading your templates for your peers, you need to upload those in 2 places. One, right here in Absol Task for Review, so your peer can see it, and then you will turn that in to the Absol Completed Peer Dropbox right here, where you will be able to get your grade from me as well. And so then once all that is done, and then on this coming Sunday night before 9 o'clock, you're going to turn in your final Absol assignment Dropbox right here, and task 1 for your final evaluation. So by this point, you will have had 2 peer reviews, templates. You would have had 2 reviews from me. And then once you have looked it over one more time and made everything you want to make, then that will go in there. So that's your Absol task 1 that you will be going over. So I think I see a question in the discussion board, so just let me look right there, right quick. Okay, Kareem, so did you put it in the, you can unmute if you want, did you put it in the review part? I can't hear you. So yeah, so you're gonna need to put that in 2 locations, and I can't pull up my grades right now to see, but yes, 2 locations. So you'll put you're talking about your peer review template, Kareem? Can't hear you. All right, well, I can't hear you. So just make sure that you put it in the Absol Task for Review so that your peer can see it, and then put both of them in the completed peer review Dropbox so that I can see it for a grade. Crystal, will you unmute and share how you found the comments from the professor that was not in the in the discussion board?
So up in the top right corner, it's got something called the grade things in Blackboard, and I clicked on that and then clicked on your class, and then it opened up for me.
Good, perfect. And then she says she found it, so good. That's great. And I don't see it from your perspective, so that's what makes it hard for me. So this is week 3, so I want us to go ahead and just open up week 3 for just a second. And so this week we have tonight's session, and then you have Thursday night's coaching session with Drs. Lamb and Shepherd. And just like this session, you have the very same Zoom link for their session as well. So it'll be the same link that you've used before. So tonight we read Aldridge 2, 9, and 10. And there's a link right here for DeFore about more professional learning community things that you can learn about right there. And then right here is your APA link for the Purdue Wise Owl right there as well, to also assist you with your APA. So your task 1 revisions are due to your instructor. So that is via, let me scroll down just a little, task for review and the Absol Dropbox. Your Absol task 1 peer reviews, there are 2 of those. go into the Dropbox, and then don't forget to put them in the task for review so that they can, your colleagues can see that as well, because your feedback is really important to them. And you all see things that I didn't even see. So, I mean, it's just important. It's a collaborative process. And like I said, everything's iterative, and it's a collaborative process. And working together, we can all help to make everyone's final product the very best that the state will ever receive. Your task 2 is due in Blackboard's discussion board, which again is the task for review, this Sunday night. And we're going to talk about task 2 in a few minutes. And then don't forget to establish your Zoom schedules with your team, set your policies with your assigned Zoom group, and then refer to the peer review material under peer review materials for your, right here, let's just look at that. Your peer review process is right there for you in Blackboard. So, and of course that is something that we have to open, but this is the whole peer review process that tells you what you'll be doing from week to week to week. So you've been checking that off and doing that. So that's all there for you to go back and review and look at. So we've talked about the APSL and when that's due, and that your first look at task 2 will also go in this Sunday night into the APSL task for review. Remember, anything that is in red, back to week 3, just let me pull that back up right quick. Anything that is in red is due. So all those things are due. Any questions about any of that before we move on? So that's really 4 things that'll be due this Sunday night. That's going to be the resubmission of your task 1 in task for review from me. So there's that. Then there's going to be your final task 1 in the APSL assignment Dropbox. That's 2. Then you're going to make sure you have 2 peer review templates in the APSL completed peer review box. That's 3, and then your APSL task 2 draft will go into APSL task for review discussion board, just like you did for task 1 right there. Task 2 will go right here. So that'll be 4 things for this Sunday. I don't see any questions. So, oh, one question before we move on. Sure, task 1. So task 1, you're going to resubmit in, after you get my first feedback and the feedback from your 2 peers, and you make changes to your paper, you will resubmit to APSL task for review, which is the discussion board, right back in here in task 1. So you see we've had 56 posts from our class in there. So you'll put it right back in there, and then I'll see that and then reassign a grade. So that's the first thing with task 1. The second thing with task 1, after you have resubmitted that and gotten your grade, you're then going to put it in the, let me get back to AppSell and not make that mistake. The AppSell assignment Dropbox, make sure you hit AppSell and not AppTell, and that'll go right there, task 1 for review, and you'll put that in there. And then the other 2 things for task 1 is to make sure you have completed 2 peer reviews on the template. The peer reviews go in 2 places. In APSL task 1 for peer review so that your peers can see it. And then your peer review template will also go in APSL completed peer review Dropbox right here for a grade. And a lot of you have already put that in there and done that. Oh, well, maybe I can see everyone's post and you can only see the ones that have been made to you, Crystal. That's probably what that is. So, okay, but you saw on mine, I guess, where it said 56. That's probably because I have everybody's, and you can probably just see yours. So that would make sense too. Again, I don't see it from your end, so. So that's task 1, and then we're going to talk a little more about task 2. So what we want to talk about in task 2 is we're going to be looking at data collection. And so we're going to talk about some information that will hopefully help you through task 2 and through task 3. And data can be daunting because you can be so data rich and so information poor, regardless of what level you work at, elementary, middle, or high. And it can start to really feel overwhelming. So I'm going to try to address multiple levels. Of course, I'm an elementary school principal, so that's where most of my experience is. Dr. Crawford has been a principal at all 3 levels, and he says that he has learned so much from the elementary level that he wished he had known at the middle school and high school level. And so that made me feel a little bit better anyway. When you're looking at data, go ahead and have your set purpose in mind before you start looking at it. Just sort of think about with your team, what do we want to zero in on? What do we want to zero in on? What are we trying to accomplish here? And what are the things we really need to look for to be able to move forward? It's easy to make a plan to move forward, but if you don't understand where you're coming from and what you're trying to accomplish, then it's just easy to get down the wrong path. So I know those of you in elementary in North Carolina, how tricky this is right now, because we're in the middle of a huge legal thing with Dibbles and TRC, who are saying they have the rights and the contract for our youngest children to be having their statewide assessments. And then we've got our state superintendent who has signed on with iStation, and they're saying that the iStation is not legal for us to be using, and there's huge debate. And I think Wake County and Cabarrus County and some other counties are paying out of their own pocket to continue to use Amplify, Dibbles, TRC. We actually, today on day 7, started our first iStation today, even though we're not sure that this is what we'll still be using with our children. So it's just a really frustrating time right now. We don't really know what to even look for, or really how to. We got trained yesterday on the assessment and started it today, and then to know that this might not be the assessment we'll continue using. And it's frustrating, and unfortunately, it's the children that are suffering because we don't really have a good, valid way right now of knowing how to assess them or what to do. So we're sort of falling back on things that we've always historically known and done anyway, and just sort of trying to still have a base. So it's just been very, very frustrating for all of us across the state with that. So I don't even know what to say about all that. So you can also think about, when you're thinking about data, you can think about your whole school universal screeners, like Ames Web is one popular one. And even though we do use Ames Web, my 4th and 5th grade teachers still pull Amplify's paper pencil days and door fluency, and still do that with their children paper pencil every year. And we have found that to be very helpful. And then you have other things like you might give scholastic reading inventories. You have, of course, last year's EOGs. You have last year's EOCs. And then we have been given some preliminary EBOS data that's currently out that is helping as well. My teachers today in 4th and 5th grade, we were meeting, and they were talking about how beneficial even just doing that days, Amplify days, and door fluency is, because especially as they start getting in middle school and high school, you might look at a child and just think, well, they can't read. And you don't really know why they can't read. And so when you have those little nuances of they can't predict what the sentence is saying because they can't fill in the days, the like closed sentences, or they're not fluent enough to be able to comprehend. Those things really do start help teasing out, especially with those older readers. You just have to use what you have, and every school has different things, and just use that to the best of your ability. Because we'll sit until November or December waiting on EBOS scores. And so you can't really sit around for half the year and just not do anything while you're waiting on EBOS. So you just have to go ahead, use what you have, move forward, and then when something else comes through, It comes in whenever it comes, then take a look at that and just sort of try to evaluate whether or not you're on the right trajectory. So just go ahead and move on, or we'll be sitting there all year not making any movement. So we can't do that. And here's a really important thing. I don't know if any of your schools do Max Thompson, but it's an important thing, and that is, what are they supposed to know at the end of the year? So really looking at those end of year goals, what are they supposed to know? And then how are we going to get them there? And staying focused on teaching what they are supposed to know. It's really no different than the analogy I know you've all heard about if you're going to drive to Maryland from North or South Carolina today, you're going to know where in Maryland you're going to go, and you're going to put that in your GPS and try to get there. So it's the very same thing. How you need to know where you're going, and you need to make sure that the information you're giving children and holding them accountable for learning is what you are wanting them to do. And we'll talk about some ways to do that shortly. But just think about, what do they need for the end of the year to be successful, and then work backwards from there. And if you can, put some benchmarks in place along the way to make sure that you are making your progress towards that goal, then do that. So in middle school, some of you have struggling readers in middle school, and it's so easy. And a lot of people will do this. Put them on iReady, put them on Study Island. Here, put them on the computer. And of course, the people selling these programs will tell you, put your children on my computer program for 45 minutes a day, and boy, will they be able to read. Well, if it was that easy, that's what we would all be doing every day. It's not that easy. So really keep that in mind. I know that iReady, I think it really, if any of you use iReady, the biggest benefit of that is the teacher toolbox piece, and then the actual instruction that the teachers give, and then the children can practice along the way. But just putting them on the computer is just not going to get us where we want to be. So always go back to the question about why are we struggling and where are we struggling. In high schools, I know your EOC data, that's sort of like autopsy data. By the time you get it, the kids are gone, and then that's the end of that. So go back and look at your trends, especially once you get your EVOS. You can go back and pinpoint where the teachers were the strongest, where they were the weakest, which groups did well, which groups didn't do well. And then you can go back and you can think about those strategies to apply. You can look at all the teachers for the same EOCs and EVOS. Look at their historical growth. If you have one teacher who's consistently blue, exceeding, and one that's historically red, and they're all teaching the same thing, which is not met, how could you use that blue teacher maybe to model or provide professional development for the other people who are teaching the same things that she's teaching? Or how could you maybe use peer observations to help the ones who are in the red to go observe the blues, especially when you have a historical trend of 3, 4, 5 years of these same kind of data results on teachers. So the question is, how could you work together in the department, in the grade level, whatever level you're working at, to build the overall capacity and strengthen everybody across the board? Because that's really, you can't give every single child your blue teacher. And if it was your child, you would want your child to have that blue teacher. So how can you build that overall capacity so that every single child is getting that very best, And at some point, back to these difficult conversations, which we've already discussed just a little, in your administrative career, you're going to have to look at EVOS data, and you're going to have some really difficult conversations. And when that data comes in, and like I said, it's usually November-ish, and it's a good time to start thinking about middle of year PDPs and having those conversations. It's very personal to people. And I don't know how many of you know, but in North Carolina, our EVOS data, teachers get bonuses based on EVOS data, and principal pay is now tied to EVOS data. And it can be as much as a $20,000 a year range in a principal's pay based on their 3-year EVOS data trend. So I'll never forget my superintendent one time saying, how are you supposed to plan on how you can make a house payment when you got that big of a gap in your pay? And it's true. So it's very personal to us all. And these are just not easy conversations to have. And sometimes HR will call you when you have teachers who are in the red, and you're having to talk about that and talk about what you're doing to help that teacher and get the teacher out of the red. So again, that's one reason why we do have you completing peer reviews, because you're going to be having these kinds of conversations with teachers. You're going to be having these kinds of conversations with parents, whether they're your PTA parents or parents about children and what they're wanting for their children. And just those individual data conversations can be really, really difficult, especially when it's someone who is historically struggling with their proficiency, with their EVOS data, and then their husband, and this, I'm not making this up, this is, this is a true thing right here. Their husband just passed away unexpectedly, and all these kinds of things are happening at one time, then you're going to have to sit down and have this conversation. So these things are just hard. So once, when you're working with your PLC and you've narrowed your focus and you've decided what you want to look at, just make sure that what you're looking at is tied to the correct data that's going to support your work. Zero in on that right data and apply the right remedy for your work. And your principal and assistant principal, of course, is a great place to go for assistance. They should know what your school needs. Remember that your principal may already know that need. I think we talked about this last week. That your PLC will come up with, but that's just something that's on their back burner. It's not because it's not important to your principal, but it's just like one of those things that they just have not had time to deal with, and they're going to be thrilled that you are going to be ready to go on in there and deal with that. So use all the data you have, because you do want to look at every single thing. And then just look at it as that, like an EOC, an EOG, whatever. That is one piece of data from that one day. So you need those formative pieces and those summative pieces, because all those pieces of data really just give you like a puzzle. And if you're missing any important piece, then your picture is not complete. So you're trying to get a picture of the whole child or the whole group or the whole situation of what you are wanting to look at with your PLCs. So we're going to look just a little deeper into some EVOS right now. Let me just check the questions right quick. Oh, isn't that horrible? Yes, M-Class and Dibbles are no longer in Power School, so no access. That's so frustrating. Thank goodness. I made my people print it out in color every single year. Thank goodness. No, I have never heard of Linkit test. Do not know anything about that, Kareem. I apologize. But I would argue that if that's something that they're giving in your school, then that is a piece of the puzzle, and go ahead and feel free to use that. So I'm going to go to Absol Template and Materials, and we're going to scroll down, and we're just going to go to Dr. Shepard's contribution right here. Oops, which I have to open. And so we're going to talk a little about EVOS, which is Education Value Added, Education Value Added. I don't think that's education system. Okay, but anyway, it's the statewide model for measuring student growth on common assessments. So here's the thing. You don't really know who your children are being compared against, because they are being compared against other students with similar testing histories from across the state. So it all depends on how those other children perform that have similar testing histories to your students as to whether or not it's deemed that your student is going to make growth or not. So here are some resources that Dr. Shepard linked in for you. Some high school references right here about EVOS, and then it just says that EVOS predicts a student's score on an assessment given the student's past assessment data and the expectation that all students should make at least an average amount of growth in that grade or subject. The teacher's growth score is determined by comparing the amount of growth made by his or her students to the average amount of growth made by other people with similar testing histories. A teacher must be connected to a minimum number of students to receive a growth score. So if you had an elementary school that had 10 AIG children in it, your AIG teacher is not going to have an EVOS score because she doesn't have enough students attached to that for an EVOS score, because you have to have enough data for it to be statistically significant, or it will not go through there. So here is a little tricky thing about EVOS. So this is something Dr. Crawford shared just right before class. So 0, so here's your bell curve. So 0 is right in the middle, and that's basically 0 line is usually indicated as a green line in EVOS, and that represents 1 year growth. So anything from 0 to +2, they say you met a year. 0 to -2, because of standard deviations, you met a year. So anywhere between -2 and +2, you would be in the green and you met. So that's basically like the whole thing under the bell curve, right? So anything that is plus 2.01 or greater exceeds, so you're going to be in the blue, and anything that is minus 2.01 or less does not meet. So here's your frustration as a principal when your salary is contingent upon this. So I have a friend who has a minus 2.01, 1/100th of a point from meeting, and how significant that is for her. It's horrible. And then let me see if I can. This was new last year. I'm going to show you this right quick. Last year was the first time we ever had this. And when I say last year, I mean last year's EVOS. So if we just finished the 18-19 year, that would be the 17-18 EVOS. That was the first time we ever had this. We can now get students by subgroups, and we had never had that until the last reporting that we got. So that has been very helpful as well for us to be able to look at subgroups, subgroup data as well. So I'm going to go back to our APSL template and materials folder. And then I'm going to go down to mine. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about EVOS. So EVOS measures student growth, and that cannot be confused with proficiency. And that is probably one of the hardest things for teachers to wrap their minds around, proficiency versus growth. They will come into my office. It's so hard to just get that across to them that it has nothing to do with whether or not they pass the test. Teachers just have a hard time with that. They, especially if they haven't met growth, that all my children passed. Well, that doesn't mean that they met their growth expectations. Sometimes they'll come into my office and they'll have all this documentation laid out, arguing with me about why they shouldn't be read. Well, I can't change that, and it has nothing to do with proficiency. It has to do with growth. And that is just a really, really hard thing for us all sometimes to wrap our minds around. We just always have to be mindful of that. So students can exceed growth and not be proficient, and they can be proficient and not meet growth. So that is, that's just very, very tricky. When you're an administrator, you can't have excuses, so you have to have solutions. So when people say, well, my children came high, and high children are hard to grow. And other people will say, well, my children are low, and they spend so much time in below grade level remediation, they'll never grow. Well, we can't be buying into those excuses. We have to really be focused on what are we going to do to not only have proficiency, but to also have growth. So EVOS captures the adult impact on learning and creates an even playing field for all students. And they say that because they're comparing these children to other children with similar testing histories. So it is supposed to be an even playing field across the board regardless. So even if your students, let's say in high school, are honors students, they're still expected to grow because they are being compared to other honors students from across the state with similar testing histories. those of you in high school, when you're working in your PLC, look at that subgroup data that has recently been released in your schools based on proficiency on EBROS growth, that subgroup data that can be now putting us into the TSI status and all that. So make sure that you're looking at that. And on your school report cards, your EVOS counts as 20% and your proficiency counts as 80% in North Carolina. And there's a huge controversy about that, and some people want that changed. So it wouldn't surprise me if it doesn't eventually change, but as far as I know, as of today, it is still 80% proficiency and 20% growth. And in high schools, like the vast majority of your growth is based off of English 2 and Math 1 scores. So out of all the things in high school, that's a very limited amount of data to have such a huge impact on everyone. So we can't control a lot of these things. We have what we have, so we just have to move forward. So talk about these things when we're with your PLC. So we've already sort of talked about the +2, greater than +2 is blue, the green is -2 to +2, that means meet, and red minus -2 does not meet growth expectations. So we've discussed that. Now, at the top of almost every EVOS page, when you get in there, and especially when you're looking at it from an administrative view, you'll see learn how to use this report, decision dashboard. And even though it takes just a little minute for you to go in and look at those reports, they're very, very important to look at because they'll just give you like a little synopsis of what it's about, and it can help you understand it just a little better. And for years, I think I've gone to every EVOS training 101 or 401 that has been offered, and just like when I just think I might be understanding it even a little bit better is when I'll go to something else and realize I probably didn't even really understand it that well at all. It's just very complicated. There's no way you can figure out your own EVOS. And but anyway, those little videos are helpful. So I do use EVOS for middle of year PDP reflections and discussions. And so when I get my EVOS, I start at the school level. So I'll go to a staff meeting and I'll say, well, here is our history of school-wide growth right here. So we start there. So everybody sees the school accountability growth estimate at one time. We look at where the school is. We compare our schools to the school accountability growth measures from the past. We look if we're increasing or decreasing. We talk about some of the reasons why we might be increasing or decreasing. We think about some of the programmatic changes we have made, and we think about did I have a lot of retirements? Did I have a lot of really strong teachers who retired, and now they've all been replaced with beginning teachers? I mean, all these things play a part in your results. And these are variables that can impact your results and variables that are oftentimes out of our control. And so that's just the way it is. So we like to compare our growth with the growth of other similar schools in our district. So sometimes we look at other schools who are in close proximity to us because they have similar demographics. We'll look at schools that are across the state that are reflective of our demographics. There's a school in Charlotte that I always like to benchmark myself against. So think about how you're doing in relation to other schools and how you're doing in relation to your own school based on past histories. That is just a good way to start school-wide. And then as I get on into grade level meetings, you're probably going to have a very hard time seeing this, but this is one of my favorite EVOS reports, and it's called a school scatter plot. And so all of these are little yellow dots all over this scatter plot. So this right here, this line going through the middle, that is our 0, our 1 year met. That right down the middle of the bell curve line, that's right there. So plus is up here and negative is down here. So what can happen, and ask your administrator if you can go in and see the school scatter plot. If you hover over, so this is growth. So here is a school, there's a little yellow dot right there. So that school had basically the second highest proficiency in our district, And they also, that's not true. That's their growth. So that's their growth. So they had next to highest growth, they had highest growth. This little yellow dot right here had highest growth. Down here is the achievement. So you can see that this school, all these other schools up here had higher achievement than this school, but this school had the second highest growth in, I took a screenshot of this a year or so ago. So this one had the second highest growth. Let's say it was 5th grade reading. So all these schools had higher proficiency, but these folks really, really grew these. These folks right here, this school, and if I was really in the program, it would pop up the name of the school from the district. But that school, even though they had almost the highest proficiency, if not the highest proficiency, did not meet growth. So that's a really interesting one, and it's fun to play with. So if you can get your administrator, and your administrator might not know that that one's there, but if you can get your administrator let you get in there, that's a really fun one to look at. But it does help you see where your growth is in comparison to the district. And so that is really, really helpful. And then when you get on in there, you'll see that you have PLCs, grade teams, grade levels teams, and subject areas. So you can see this is kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. And here is our school value added. That was in 2018. That is a 3-year average, and we're going to talk about that 3-year average in just a minute. And then this is your quintile groups of your students, of your achievement groups. So you have your lowest students, between lowest and middle, middle, between middle and high. So let's just look at my kindergarten for just a minute. So in 2018, they were met. The 3-year average, which is not a simple average, they exceeded. We didn't have enough children in the lowest group to have a report there. The children who were in the level 2 quintile exceeded. The middle met. The level 4 quintile exceeded. The highest did not meet. So that was a great time for us to talk with our kindergarten team about the highest children, the children who are coming in high, and what are we doing to move them, to grow them. So that's just a good time to be able to just look at that and just think, what can we do? That's just a great PLC like piece. So these are data that you can use for your PLCs when you're thinking about your PLCs and when you're really trying to tease out the subgroups that you may be wanting to look at. And now that we have those, what I showed you earlier, now that we have this right here, you can also use this part now, the student subgroup growth. We've only had that reported out once to look at those subgroups for those of you who are wanting to look at subgroups for your PLCs as well. And then that report that we just saw up there also comes in the form of this pie chart, which makes it, in my opinion, even easier to see. So here's kindergarten again, and it's very clear that you can see the percent of the kindergartners that fell in that highest group. And you can see that we did not meet their growth, but we met it in our level 4s and 2s. Level 3s, the middle children, they met. So what does that tell us? And that can just tell us a lot of things. So that's just good conversation. And then you can go in there and you can put in your subject specific or whatever you want to put in right there. So consider that cohort data over time. I mean, how has that looked? You can go back and look at your kindergartens over the past year or whatever grade you're going to subject you're going to look at, and see were those high children always the red ones? Were the middles always green? I know one time I had like 33 in my 4th grades. The high children exceeded, the lowest children exceeded. So think about that. They were getting pulled out for AIG. The lowest children were getting pulled out for MTSS. They were getting pulled for EC. The teachers were working with those lower children more. The higher children got services through other things as well and through other enrichment. The middle children didn't meet. It's because they were the middle children of 33 and 34, and they were well behaved. They sat there and they didn't get what they needed. That didn't mean they weren't proficient. They might have been proficient, but that class size can really, really play a huge factor in all that as well. When we get to individual teacher growth data, so here's a teacher, and I picked a great example right here. So this multi-year trend, your teachers who have been in the same course subject for 3 or more years will have 3 years on their individual teacher growth data. So this teacher exceeded 3 years in a row. And then let's look at her multi-year trend. Well, how in the world is it way out there to the right, like a plus, I can't even read that from here, but like 5 or 6 or something, when her individual years had been like a +1 and a +2? Well, that's because that is not a simple average. It is literally taking all these children and they're all being weighted equally. And anytime you have more of anything in a data set, more students, more people on a drug trial, whatever it is you're looking at, the more reliable your data become. So in this instance, so it's not a simple average. They didn't just take this, add it together and divide by 3. They treated every single child. So now this is representative of 20 children, this is representative of 20, this is representative of 20, this is representative of 60. So when you take those 60, that data become more reliable. And that is how you get that, because that is not a simple average. So interestingly, and I did not copy this, but I have someone who has been like green for 3 years, but right by the red line green, like -1.97, whatever, for 3 years. So her multi-year trend is in the red. Because when you take those 3 years and do the multi-year trend, now you have 3 times the amount of data. Now that data is more reliable. So her multi-year trend is in the red. Now that was a very difficult conversation to have. We have it. I hope that it sort of got across. And we talked about things like even like just clear learning goals. Clear learning goals can make a difference. One of my favorite clear learning goal stories is my assistant principal had walked into a kindergarten class and the child had a hundreds board and the child was coloring 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, coloring. And the assistant principal said, well, tell me what you're learning. She said, well, I'm coloring all these over here in the right box that end in 0. The teacher thought the child understood the learning goal that she was counting by tens. The child didn't understand that. So sometimes just going in and saying to a child, tell me what you're learning, can be very enlightening because what they think they're learning is not what the teacher intended for them to be learning. And then here's another way you can look at it just by teacher. Oh no, that was the whole grade. In this instance, this was my 4th grade math where they didn't have a low group, but their middles and their highs exceeded. And then 4th grade reading, they had met in the middle and high groups. And then here are some PLC opportunities to think about student cohorts over time, grade level, subject level over time, subgroup data over time, achievement group data over time, analyze strengths, identify the positives. You don't want to lose this. So if your achievement groups in 4th grade math are all exceeding, you want to know why they're exceeding because you want to make sure that you're not going to stop something that's working. That's equally as important as what's not working and how are we going to fix that. Analyze areas for improvement that you'll be doing with your PLC. Use research-based materials and the literature to strengthen these areas. So this is a little thing that I made up that I give my teachers in the middle of the year when they get their EVOS, and you can just look through this as you go through. But they just have to answer questions based on did they exceed or did they not exceed. So that would be something if you want to use this, you can for your PLC when you're looking at EVOS data. But that's just sort of a reflection sheet and sort of helps them see a little about, and that's in there in those materials for you. Another important thing, especially if you're in elementary, that I want you to consider is this. In elementary schools, 6 tests make up your school EVAS. 3rd grade reading, 4th grade reading and math, 5th grade reading, math, and science. So that's 6 tests. So when you think about that, your 3rd grades, which we have a cap on 3rd grade classes. So 3rd grades count 1/6 towards your growth. 4th grades are 2 out of 6, so that's 1/3 of your growth. 5th grade, 3 out of 6, science, reading, and math. So that's half of your growth comes from your 5th grade. So if you're making up classes and assigning teachers to grade levels and assigning students to classes, and it turns out because 4th and 5th don't have a cap, so if it turns out that either 4th grade or 5th grade is going to have 30 in the class and the others can have 24, then you're going to want to put 24 students in your 5th grade class because they count half and 4th grade only counts 1/3. So those are just little things to think about along the way that, nobody really tells you these things. You just sort of have to figure these out as you go. And then there are 2 more resources in here for you that you may be interested in using that Dr. Crawford uploaded. Here's his first one. It just tells a little bit more about EVAS, how to log in. And then he has some reflective questions here that you could use with your PLCs to talk about what kinds of questions you might want to think about when you are with your PLC. Just really good guiding questions to help be able to drive your PLC discussion. And then there's another one in here from Dr. Crawford as well, still again under template and materials for APSL, and that's labeled Dr. Crawford number 2 right there. And just some good questions that you could use with your PLCs as well when looking at all your materials. So, so that's sort of like an overview of EVAS. It is a lot. It's a lot to look at. You can drown in it. So just really sort of keep your eye on what it is that you're looking at for EVAS. Look at those quintiles. Look at your historical growth patterns for your teachers. And like I said, they'll probably come out like November-ish, so that's just in time for the middle of the year PDPs. And of course, you don't ever want to wait until that long to start something, because if you do, then you'll never get around to doing anything. So use these resources. The more you know, the more you understand, the more pieces of data that you have, the bigger picture you have. It might even help you find something that you typically wouldn't have known just because you included, like Kareem, you mentioned that one data source that I haven't heard of, but use it. Use everything that you have. Decide what you're going to focus on and move forward. There are so many distractors in this job. Staying focused is one of the hardest parts of what we do. So just always think about staying focused on 3 things. Collaboration. Find out what's effective for your school through collaboration. Find out how to replicate the effective practices across classrooms, and figure out how to give teachers time to collaborate and coach teachers that way. So collaboration. The second thing is fundamental instruction. You cannot replace best practices in a classroom. The only way that you know as an administrator is to make sure you're in the classrooms every day. Spend your time in the hallways, spend your time in the classrooms. It's a challenge, but it has to be your priority, and you have to stay focused on that. If you know what's taking place, you don't have to wait till scores come back to know how you're going to do. You're in there every day and you can coach. So collaboration, fundamental instruction, and focus on those standards. What do they need to know at the end of the year? Because that's what they're going to be tested on. So what do they need to know? So focus on those standards. You may have a teacher who has historically done well and now they're slipping. It might be because they're slipping away from the standards. Maybe the standards changed and they didn't want to change. This is very important when you're coaching teachers. You may be doing great things, but are you focused on the standards? So that is just very, very important. You can put the standards on your, there's an app where you can download the standards. We use planbook.com in our school where the teachers have to put their plans in. So when I walk in the classroom with my iPad, I can pull up their plans. I can look at their standards. Some schools require that standards be written on the board. I have 2 teachers that take it further than that. They'll have a child that gets up and they'll actually tell me the standard that they're learning. So, and I asked a child the other day, does that help you? And he said, oh yeah, because I really know what it is I'm supposed to be learning. So I think that's important as well. So through this process of the 6 evidences that you're going to complete over your year-long course, I'm going to go back and pull up the APSL template and materials. This is just giving you good practice of what's going to be expected from you as an administrator, because all these things that you're doing are things that you're going to be doing as a school administrator on a daily basis. I'm going to talk about task 2 right here in just a second. The APSL experience is going to give you practice in all these things we've discussed tonight. So over the last 2 weeks, we've talked about what is a PLC, what does a PLC look like, and many of you are already thinking about PLCs differently than you were thinking about it just at the end of last year. You're going to be change agents in your school, and you're going to help your school move forward. And promoting your PLCs in the right way is going to help you with that. So you've selected your committees, you've established your norms, and you've set all this groundwork in APSL Task 1, and now you're ready to start at APSL Task 2. So our instructions for APSL Task 2 is that that's the description. In narrative form, so again, that means you're going to write something, describe the data collection and presentation process central to the PLC's effort to identify the most pressing need. So you're going to identify that pressing need. So under prompt 1, the candidate will describe and evidence data collection strategies and criteria in the process of identifying the most pressing need. So we've talked a lot tonight about data collection strategies, so that you can have a better idea of those kinds of things that you can go back and grasp. You're going to lead a collaborative, back to that word collaborative meeting, where data is analyzed and discussed, conducting with agreement in a specific need. Video of the meeting is optional, and I do think that that is preferred. Actually, it is optional, but I do think it is a preference. So under data collection strategies, other things besides EVOS we talked about tonight are common formative assessments, any kind of benchmarks that you may be using in your schools. Some of you may use NC Check-In. Those are those 3 times a year mini EOGs many of you are using. Progress monitoring data that some of you may have, even like in MTSS processes of progress monitoring data. And then any other thing that you might be using in your school. So this is a narrative, it's in yellow. So you're going to write about these data collection strategies, and you're going to use that to help you get your end result of identifying those most pressing needs. So remember, this is a narrative, and you're going to work collaboratively with your team. The second part is the criteria and process for identifying that most pressing need. You'll narratively talk about the criteria and process you and your team went through for identifying your most pressing need. You're developing a plan, a collaborative plan that you are the leader of. The criteria and process you and your team will use to identify your most pressing need. And then the third part is the collaborative data analysis. So you're going to take all these pieces of data, you're going to analyze those, you're going to have your criteria and your processes for identifying those, and you're going to analyze all those data pieces together collaboratively. You're going to dissect it, you're going to cut it apart. You're going to see things other people don't see, and they're going to see things you don't see. And all those things working together really help you have that good picture of what's going on in your school. So once you've done that, then you and your team collaboratively will come to a consensus using everything you have gathered and done and analyzed, And you are going to then determine what your most pressing need is. And that again is going to be put in a narrative form, your most pressing need. And then you're going to move forward in trying to make a difference once you have identified that most pressing need. Now this APSL task 2 has 2 prompts. So that was prompt 1. Now here is prompt 2. So you're going to graphically represent in narrative form, in the narrative, the form of charts, tables, graphs. They are visuals that will be used to illustrate and support the data analysis and conclusions. So you're going to graphically represent your data in the narrative that you've discussed in prompt 1. It talks about graphs, charts, tables. Those are plural words because you're going to have a lot of these. These are going to be graphic representations that are going to support your data analysis and conclusions that you've talked about in prompt 1. So you're going to put things in here for us to see. Remember that they still need to be an APA style, and you are going to be calling those figures and when we go into your APSL template, oh, well, that was that. Yes. Sorry. Already had that up. You're going to put that right there under task 2. So again, that is going to be your data presentation that's going to be in the narrative, and then you will put that in there. And then in task 3, you'll be doing it in an actual graph. But right now for task 2, this data presentation is the data that you are using, the graphs, the tables, the charts. These are visuals that will be used to illustrate and support your data analysis and conclusions. So that's your task 2. So you'll put in your first submission of your task 2 by Sunday night as well, that being the 4th thing that you will be turning in. So back to then week 3. You just want to go back there right fast. Sorry, we've gone over. All these things in red is what you'll be doing. Plus the extra submission back to your task for review for your revised grade on that. Let me check out the questions. Do we add task 2 stuff under task 1 in the template, or do we just put 2 items? You can just add it under the same template and we'll just scroll on down. Do we have to use EVOS? No. No, you're not going to have that in a high school CTE. No. No, it's not reflected in EVOS, so you won't have that opportunity, Tony. Oh, you're not using that anymore, Chelsea. Wow. So you used to use it and you're not using it now. Interesting. All right, so then you would just not use that. So do you have any more questions or anything for tonight? Sorry, I've kept you over. Well, you know how to reach me if you do. You're doing great work. Keep up the good work. You're getting through this, and we've already had 3 weeks. Look at us. There's only 16 weeks, and 2 more weeks will be a third of the way through already. It's just like, yeah, hard to believe. Life flies. So I want to thank you all again for joining me tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for, let me have one more question. Just let me see. I have one specific to my, okay, well, just hang on and at the end, and then we'll chat privately at the end. I'll turn off the recording and we'll chat privately at the end. So if I can do anything, just, you know how to contact me, contact me. I'm working really hard to try to make sure that I'm contacting you back very quickly. So I will record this video. I will upload it later this evening for you. And thank you again for your time and for being here. You are such a great class. I really enjoy this time with you every week. And thank you for choosing Gardner Webb. And please feel free to contact me if I can do anything to assist you. Have a great night. And if you want to hang on for anything after please feel free to do that. I'm going to stop the recording. Maybe.